The rain had been falling for hours on the night of September 20th, 1985, turning the streets of Lower Manhattan into a maze of shimmering reflections. Inside the federal courthouse, the hallway was almost silent. A handful of FBI agents stood outside a closed courtroom, saying very little. They had spent years preparing for this moment, yet none of them looked relaxed. They knew what was about to happen would change the American Mafia forever. Behind those heavy wooden doors sat a man who had once been welcomed into the inner circle of one of New York's most feared crime families. He knew where the money came from. He knew who gave the orders. He knew who disappeared after asking too many questions. More importantly, he knew the one secret the Mafia believed could never be broken. Omerta, the code of silence. For generations, it had protected bosses from prison and turned witnesses into corpses. Men had died to preserve it. Entire families had built their power on the belief that no made man would ever betray the organization. But on this night, that belief was about to shatter. The man inside the courtroom wasn't begging for mercy. He wasn't bargaining out of fear. He had already made his decision. Once he opened his mouth, dozens of years of secrets would become evidence. Hidden murders would have names. Secret meetings would have dates. Conversations whispered in back rooms would be replayed in front of juries. The Mafia had survived gang wars. It had survived ambitious prosecutors. It had survived rival families. What it had never truly survived was someone from the inside willing to explain exactly how the machine worked. By sunrise, some of the most powerful gangsters in America would realize that the greatest threat to the Mafia wasn't another family. It was one of their own. And the man who made that impossible choice would help destroy an empire that had seemed untouchable. How did one FBI informant bring an entire Mafia family to its knees? And why did breaking the code of silence become the most dangerous decision in organized crime history? For decades, the American Mafia operated like a government hidden beneath another government. Politicians changed. Police commissioners retired. Federal agents came and went. But the five families of New York continued making millions through gambling, loan sharking, labor racketeering, extortion, and construction contracts. They didn't need headlines. They preferred shadows. Among those families, few inspired more fear than the Lucchese crime family. Unlike some of their louder rivals, the Luccheses believed in quiet power. They stayed away from unnecessary attention. Violence was used carefully, often without warning, and almost never without permission. Their leaders understood that the less the public knew, the longer the business could continue. One man understood those rules better than almost anyone. His name was Anthony "Tony Ducks" Corallo. Corallo didn't look like a movie gangster. He rarely raised his voice. He wasn't known for flashy suits or dramatic speeches. His greatest weapon was patience. He preferred to let others underestimate him while he quietly expanded the family's influence across New York. Construction companies, garment businesses, trucking firms, union locals. Every profitable corner of the city offered another opportunity. Money flowed upward through captains, soldiers, and trusted associates until it reached the boss. Everyone received a share. Everyone understood the rules, or at least they thought they did. Corallo had built an organization that valued loyalty above everything else. Promotions weren't earned through violence alone. They were earned by proving you could stay silent under pressure. Federal investigators spent years chasing members of the Lucchese family, but witnesses rarely appeared. Evidence disappeared. Victims forgot conversations. Records vanished before warrants arrived. To outsiders, it almost looked supernatural. In reality, it was discipline. The Mafia didn't simply punish betrayal. It erased it. That fear shaped every decision made inside the organization. Young associates learned quickly that talking to law enforcement wasn't just forbidden. It was considered worse than murder. A man who cooperated became invisible. His name wasn't spoken. His family could lose everything. His closest friends might be ordered to kill him. Those lessons weren't theoretical. Everyone knew stories of men who had disappeared after breaking the rules. No bodies, no funerals, just silence. It was a powerful system, but every system has a weakness. The FBI understood that arresting individual gangsters wasn't enough. Replace one captain, and another would take his place. Convict a soldier, and business continued the next morning. Organized crime functioned like a corporation. Remove one employee, and someone else filled the position. If the Bureau wanted lasting results, they needed someone who understood the entire structure. Someone close enough to the leadership to explain not just what happened, but how decisions were made. Finding that person seemed impossible, until another investigation unexpectedly opened the door. One of the Bureau's most valuable undercover assets wasn't born into organized crime. He wasn't even an Italian-American gangster. Yet, through years of extraordinary deception, he managed to convince powerful mafia figures that he was exactly the kind of criminal they respected. His name was Joseph Pistone. The world would eventually know him by another name, Donnie Brasco. Pistone spent years living two lives. During the day, he quietly reported to the FBI. At night, he drank in social clubs, collected debts, watched criminal meetings, and slowly earned the confidence of men who believed they were welcoming a future-made member into their world. Every conversation mattered. Every joke mattered. Every handshake mattered. One mistake meant death. Unlike television dramas, Pistone couldn't simply arrest everyone after collecting evidence. His mission depended on patience. He had to watch crimes unfold without exposing himself. He attended planning sessions, observed personalities, and learned something that no surveillance camera could ever capture. He learned how gangsters thought. He discovered that loyalty wasn't always genuine. Many members smiled in front of their bosses while quietly competing against each other behind closed doors. Promotions created jealousy. Money created suspicion. Respect could disappear overnight. The mafia appeared united. Inside, it was often held together by fear. Those hidden tensions fascinated the FBI because they suggested something important. If enough pressure was applied, even lifelong gangsters might choose survival over loyalty. Still, the Bureau faced an enormous obstacle. Being an undercover agent and recruiting an informant were two completely different things. Pistone could observe. He could report. But he couldn't force someone to betray decades of mafia tradition. That decision had to come from inside. And for years, nobody seemed willing to make it. Meanwhile, another ambitious federal prosecutor was developing a strategy that would eventually become one of the most devastating legal weapons ever used against organized crime. His name was Rudolph Giuliani. Rather than treating murders, extortion, and gambling as separate crimes, Giuliani wanted juries to see the mafia as what it truly was, a continuing criminal enterprise. Using the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, better known as RICO, prosecutors could connect dozens of crimes into one massive conspiracy. Suddenly, bosses who never pulled a trigger could still face decades in prison. The law frightened organized crime, but laws alone weren't enough. Jurors needed proof. Documents helped. Surveillance helped. Wiretaps helped. Yet nothing carried the same power as testimony from someone who had actually lived inside the organization. The FBI knew it. The mafia knew it. Everyone understood that if one respected insider ever decided to cooperate, years of carefully hidden secrets could unravel faster than anyone imagined. What nobody realized was that the pressure building inside New York's underworld was becoming impossible to contain. Long prison sentences, constant surveillance, financial investigations, growing mistrust between captains. Each problem fed the next. Some gangsters began asking themselves a question they never would have considered years earlier. Was the mafia still protecting them, or had they become expendable? For generations, the answer had always been simple. The family came first. Always. But history was about to prove that even the strongest code of silence could crack when survival was on the line. And when the first crack finally appeared, it wouldn't just threaten one crew. It would send shockwaves through an entire mafia family and change the balance of power in organized crime forever. The first signs of collapse didn't come from a dramatic gunfight or a bloody mob war. They came from prison cells. As federal prosecutors expanded their use of the RICO Act during the mid-1980s, mafia members across New York began receiving sentences unlike anything they had ever faced. Instead of serving a few years for gambling or loan sharking, they were suddenly staring at decades behind bars. Some realized they would likely die in prison. For generations, the mafia had promised one thing above all else. No matter what happened, the family would take care of its own. If a soldier went to prison, his wife would receive money. His children wouldn't go hungry. His loyalty would be rewarded. At least, that was the promise. Reality was becoming very different. As convictions piled up, money became tighter. Payments to imprisoned members became smaller. In some cases, they stopped altogether. Men who had risked everything for the organization felt forgotten. The bosses remained free, continuing to earn millions, while loyal soldiers counted the days inside cramped prison cells. The longer they sat there, the more dangerous their thoughts became. For the FBI, this wasn't luck. It was strategy. Agents understood that fear alone rarely convinced a mafia member to cooperate. But disappointment could. Betrayal could. The realization that the organization they had sacrificed everything for viewed them as disposable. That could break even the strongest believer in Omerta. One man would prove exactly that. His name was Thomas "Tommy" Ricciardi, a respected Lucchese family soldier who had spent years carrying out orders without asking questions. He wasn't famous outside organized crime, but inside the family he had built a reputation as someone who could be trusted. He collected debts, settled disputes, and handled sensitive jobs that required complete discretion. He believed loyalty was everything. Then the arrest came. Federal investigators tied Ricciardi to a growing racketeering case. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance, financial records, testimony from witnesses. For the first time in his criminal career, he realized he wasn't escaping this one. The sentence was devastating. As prison doors closed behind him, Ricciardi expected the family to honor its word. At first, they did. His wife received envelopes filled with cash. Friends stopped by to check on the family. Messages arrived reminding him to stay strong. But as months turned into years, those visits became less frequent. The envelopes became thinner. Then they stopped completely. Meanwhile, rumors drifted through the prison. Certain captains were making fortunes. Construction contracts continued. Union kickbacks kept flowing. The bosses weren't suffering. Only the men beneath them were. For Ricciardi, the betrayal was deeply personal. He had accepted prison because he believed silence was honorable. Now silence felt like a death sentence. Still, becoming an informant wasn't a decision made overnight. Every mafia member understood what happened to traitors. If he talked, he wouldn't just lose his place in the family. He would lose his identity. His old life would disappear forever. His closest friends would become his hunters. Even if the FBI protected him, he would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. So he waited. He watched. He listened. And the more he learned, the angrier he became. The Lucchese leadership wasn't discussing ways to help imprisoned members. They were discussing business, profits, territory, power. It became painfully clear that the organization expected absolute loyalty while offering very little in return. That realization planted a dangerous idea. Maybe the code of silence wasn't sacred. Maybe it was simply another tool used by the bosses to protect themselves. Around the same time, the FBI intensified its efforts. Agents didn't pressure Ricciardi with threats. Instead, they listened. They asked about his family, his future, his children. What happens when you get out? One investigator reportedly asked during an early conversation. Ricciardi had no answer. He knew exactly what waited for him. Nothing. The family had already moved on. That silence spoke louder than any interrogation ever could. Then another event changed everything. The Bureau had quietly gathered years of electronic surveillance against Lucchese boss Anthony Corallo and his top commanders. Believing their luxury automobiles were safe from hidden microphones, senior mob leaders held private strategy meetings while riding through New York City. They couldn't have been more wrong. The FBI had secretly installed sophisticated listening devices inside one of Corallo's favorite Jaguar sedans. What those microphones captured stunned investigators. For the first time, juries wouldn't have to rely solely on witnesses describing secret mafia meetings. They could hear the bosses themselves. The recordings revealed how murders were approved, how extortion schemes operated, how disputes between captains were settled. The conversations sounded remarkably calm. There was no shouting, no dramatic movie dialogue, just businessmen discussing violence as casually as office workers planning next week's schedule. To prosecutors, the tapes were priceless. To the mafia, they were catastrophic. When word spread that federal authorities possessed secret recordings, panic quietly spread through the underworld. Who had talked? Who had made a mistake? Had someone betrayed them? Suspicion became contagious. Men who had trusted each other for decades suddenly questioned every conversation. Every unexpected arrest felt connected. Every search warrant raised new fears. Some captains became reluctant to meet in person. Others limited conversations to vague hints instead of direct orders. The organization that once depended on confidence was now poisoned by uncertainty. The FBI recognized something important. Fear was doing their work for them. An organization built on trust was beginning to doubt itself. And once distrust entered the mafia, it spread faster than any federal investigation ever could. Ricciardi watched it happen from the sidelines. He saw longtime friends accusing one another of carelessness. He heard whispers that certain leaders were protecting themselves while leaving others exposed. The family no longer looked invincible. It looked frightened. That was the moment everything changed. One afternoon, after another disappointing visit from relatives struggling to survive without financial help, Ricciardi made a request that would have been unthinkable only a few years earlier. He wanted to speak with federal agents again. This time, not as a suspect, as a potential witness. The meeting took place in complete secrecy. No dramatic confessions, no emotional speeches, just a tired man sitting across from investigators who understood exactly how much courage and danger this decision required. They didn't promise him freedom. They couldn't. They didn't promise him happiness. They couldn't do that either. What they offered was something the mafia no longer could. A future. Slowly, Ricciardi began explaining how the Lucchese family actually operated. He identified captains, explained initiation ceremonies, described payment systems, mapped criminal crews, confirmed relationships between powerful figures that investigators had only suspected for years. Every interview unlocked another piece of the puzzle. Names turned into evidence. Evidence turned into indictments. Indictments turned into convictions. And with every new arrest, another mafia member faced the same impossible choice Ricciardi had once faced. Stay loyal or survive. The FBI had discovered something far more powerful than a single informant. They had created chain reaction. One witness led to another. One conviction created another cooperator. One betrayal inspired the next. The code of silence wasn't simply breaking. It was unraveling. But the most devastating blow was still waiting. Because the information now flowing into federal hands wasn't just enough to prosecute soldiers. It was leading investigators straight toward the highest levels of the mafia hierarchy. And when America's most powerful mafia bosses finally realized how much the FBI knew, they understood they weren't hunting a rat anymore. They were trying to stop an avalanche that had already begun. The avalanche reached its full force inside a federal courtroom. By the time prosecutors were ready to present their case, years of surveillance, financial records, undercover work, and insider testimony had come together like pieces of a giant puzzle. For decades, the mafia had survived because investigators could rarely connect the boss giving the order to the crime committed on the street. Now they could. Every conversation, every payment, every meeting, every favor, every murder discussed behind closed doors. It all pointed upward. The Lucchese family's carefully built wall of secrecy was no longer protecting its leadership. It was collapsing on top of them. Anthony, Tony Ducks, Corallo had spent most of his life avoiding exactly this moment. He believed in discipline. He believed in keeping emotions out of business. He believed that if every member followed the rules, the family would survive any investigation. He never imagined that the greatest danger wouldn't come from a rival family. It would come from within. The testimony from cooperating insiders didn't just describe isolated crimes. It explained the entire system.